Hello and welcome to Talking Sit, the podcast that spills the kibble on the pets we share our homes with. My name's Jade, I'm a professional dog trainer and behaviourist. I have an undergraduate degree in animal welfare and I'm incredibly passionate about the emotional well-being of the non-human friends we spend our lives with. I will spare you the rest of my CV, but if you want to know more about me, you can hop over to my website, www.aboutyourdog.info, or any of my socials at About Your Dog. You may be here as a pet guardian, a fellow professional, you may have just stumbled across me on your podcast apps, or maybe you do have an interest in animals. Well, however you find me, I hope you're joining me for the launch of this brand new podcast with ambitions to make life better for animals. If you stick with me through the coming weeks, you're going to hear from vets, you're going to hear from nutritionists, trainers, hydrotherapists, academics, all sorts of fascinating experts in this field. So if you want to expand your knowledge through relaxed and candid interviews with some of the best people in the whole wide world, my friends, then you're in the right place. I've just had the best interview with Fabian Rivers to kick us off. This episode is entitled What Your Vet Wishes You Knew, and I am going to bring it to you after this. Okay, welcome. This is Fabian. Hi, thanks for coming on.
Hey, no, my pleasure, my pleasure. I'm very good. How are you?
Yes, I'm good, thank you. Can you please introduce yourself to anybody who does not know who you are?
So my name's Fabian Rivers. I'm a small animal and exotics vet from Birmingham. I've been practicing for 8 years and I'm really glad to be here.
Oh, thanks, babes. And as I said to you originally, I know obviously we talk about dogs a lot, but I don't want this podcast to just be about dogs. So I thought a good way for us to, I guess, open up some topics of conversation was to tell the listeners about the pets that you have, because you have more than just a dog.
I do. So I have a very geriatric old boy, Lakeland Terrier, and he is coming up to 16 years now, and he's a pain in the backside, but I love him dearly. And I also have a Rankin Dragon, which is like a mini bearded dragon. A bearded dragon, her name's Minnie. The Rankin Dragon's called Yindy, is a recent adoption. And then I also have a very thick back-sided red-footed tortoise called Boudica, or Bood for short.
Is it normal for them to have a thick backside, or you're identifying him singularly for his thick backside?
She is
Or
rather
her,
thick.
sorry. Excuse me. Okay, gotcha.
She's a tortoise version of a BBL carrier, shall we say?
Oh, okay, nice. Okay, well, maybe you can drop me some photos and I can share them on Instagram for anyone who's curious. So, like, I know you talk about being a vet a lot. You're on TV, you are very vocal on Instagram, but I mean, I was thinking of a way to phrase this, and I was thinking, well, what I want to say to Fabian is no one actually watches This Morning anymore, Fabian. So maybe you can answer some questions on a podcast instead. Yeah, I just thought we'd go over some of the stuff you've already talked about and hopefully some new stuff as well. So there's a lot of misconceptions or I guess beliefs about vets and being a vet. So do you want to start just by telling me what a typical day looks like for you? Or maybe a typical couple of days, because I know they're quite varied.
Yeah, so, I mean, typically, my normal days usually start, if we're going from when I start, I usually leave the house around 7:45, 8. I usually get to work about 9. I have to commute. And my days usually start either with a morning of consults, usually from 9 until 12:30, just consults, that's back to back, every 15 minutes, seeing another client with another issue, or if it's a little bit more difficult or it's an exotics case, that's usually a double appointment, or I will have ops. So essentially I have anything from 1 to 4 or 5 different things that I will do. So typically surgeries, neuters, spays, but also sometimes x-rays, sometimes workups, and sometimes more complicated things. So for example, if we have a dog that's eating chocolate, all the normal stuff, all that boring stuff basically. So it's usually my first half of the day is either ops or something in theatre and x-rays, blah, 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 or I'll do consults through the morning. Straight after that, then there's usually a little bit of a weird time slot where I'll probably go and chill out if I can, but typically that's when I'm supposed to do phone calls. It doesn't always happen because talking to people on the phone after 3 hours of speaking to random people through the door is a pain in the backside. And then lunch break, and then it's back into consults, back to back to back to back. In between there, if we have emergencies, I'll see them, or if there are some blood results I need to kind of call a client back for, I'll try and do it then. Discharges. So really, my day, the varied part is the kind of clientele that I'll see for a variety of different reasons. And so because I do small animals and exotics, that can be anything from your routine vaccines all the way up to, I don't know, the goose that decided to, eat a fish hook. Whatever's my typical day.
So to become an exotics vet, did you have to do an additional qualification on top of whatever standard thing goes on?
So yes and no. And in a sense, so I was very lucky. So I studied abroad, right? And typically in the UK, when you study, you get a small time slot, usually in your final year, to do some exotic training. It's usually 2 to 4 weeks.
Hang on, actually, I have a question before you carry on. What is classed as an exotic?
So anything that essentially isn't a large animal, so a horse, a cow, sheep to a certain extent, pigs to a certain extent, dogs, cats. So anything that's a rabbit, any small mammals, rabbit, ferret, hamster, guinea pig, chinchilla, any reptile, any avian bird, any zoo animal. And so obviously there's certain animals, there's this big crossover, right? So for example, if you see a zebra, it's technically an exotic animal. But people who see zebras will also have transferable skills for horses because they're both equine animals. So there are blurry areas, but typically anything that isn't routine, so an animal that either is a horse, a production animal, inverted commas, or your typical dogs and cats.
Okay, so sorry, you were saying, so you get this small window in which to practice exotics, and then I guess you just take an interest and you carry on if you like it.
Yeah. So I had by studying abroad in the Czech Republic, I went to a uni that was very exotics heavy. So, and also as part of my final year, I got the opportunity to choose it as one of my blocks. So typically in your final year, you have 5 blocks or 3 blocks, or an opportunity to expand your learning with more hands-on things that you wouldn't do in your previous 4 or 5 years, right? So I chose exotics as one of my blocks. So essentially, it's a 12-week period where 10 of those weeks I was working in an exotics clinic, either at uni or back here in the UK. And that's when I really got an idea of not only enjoying exotics as a thing, because it's varied and I like novelty. I'm a terrible dopamine chaser in that sense. But also at the same time that I got this wonderful insight to be able to do it in the UK. And I didn't think it was that common. And so I had this final year block and it went really well. I absolutely loved it. And then the place that I did my work experience at for that block offered me a job. And so I went straight into exotics practice, which, you speak to any vet student. It doesn't happen very often. It doesn't happen at all. And that's kind of how I started my journey. After the first 6 months, my mentor, who was the lead exotics vet, he quit. And so I effectively, after 6 months, took the whole exotics caseload pretty much by myself. And that was it really. But, I like pressure. Like I like that opportunity.
Yeah. Me too. It's like pressure I kind of see as an opportunity. Like I can either rise to it or I let it break me. And I think it sounds like you're probably the same sort of way. So I'm just going to go straight onto the topic that everyone is like obsessed with at the moment, which is the cost of vet bills. So what do vets wish that owners knew about pricing and decision making?
So I think what vets like clients to know is that first and foremost, we don't set the prices in 99% of the cases. Unless you're working in independent practice, I myself am just a cog in a very big system. So as some of the people listening may or may not know, 67 plus of the practices that you come into contact with are owned by 5 or 6 huge $100 million, multi-billion dollar companies, essentially. And their pricing is very much centralized and they make all the decisions. So I myself, working for one of these corporates, which is the large majority of the people that you come into contact with, do not set the prices. And so it's very difficult to navigate that relationship, trying to get people to look after their animals and provide the best care and give them all this information, and then they see the price and they think that I myself am, making some commissions or something silly like that.
Yeah.
And that's really, really a difficult conversation that I have on a daily basis. But it's also a bit of an internal fight for me because I don't feel, I'm not sure about you, but the idea of getting people to spend their hard earned money
Yeah,
to do
100%.
very big things is such a difficult part of my daily job. And part of me wants to value my job in a sense because I know that I've studied and we've all worked very hard to earn a living. But at the same time, there is a huge disconnect between myself as a staff member essentially, and the prices of things these days. So I think some context about how hard it is as vets and veterinary practitioners to charge people their hard earned money because we know it's not hard. It's really difficult right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely get the same thing, and I sometimes, if someone mentions, oh, I'll do that next month because I need to save up, and I just think, oh God, how acceptable is it for me to just give you a 50% discount right away? But we can't survive on that business model. It's really, really hard, and I am very lucky to encounter a lot of people with insurance, and I hope you are too. How many, do you think it's more often than not that people have insurance, or?
I think insurance is a tricky one. Do you know why? Because it's very much situational. So I work over three practices, and one practice is in a relatively underprivileged area in North Birmingham, which isn't the highest earning average at all. And then you kind of have a middle, another practice which is somewhere in the middle, and another practice which is the general area is kind of typically retirees and middle to higher earners. And insurance uptake is very varied between them. And so when I go to work, I have a very different expectation about how to propose things. So I would say at the practice, which is a little bit more leafy, you can probably expect, I don't know, maybe 30 to 40% uptake in insurance, right? Which isn't
Wait,
that
what does
high.
leafy mean? I've never heard someone describe something as leafy. Does that mean, is that a bit more well off?
Yeah, no, leafy. It's like there's lots of greenery. There's lots of
Oh, okay.
park.
You mean it literally. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. I
You know,
frequently in our conversations find myself not being as cool as you, so I just assumed I didn't understand what you were talking about.
we
Okay,
talk about
wow.
the orangery that they're building, that type of
Yeah,
mark of person, and
30 to
then you have
40%. That shocks me. That really shocks me.
yeah. I don't think it will be much higher than that. We're regularly having a conversation, and it's interesting as well because what people are doing, and you know, people will understand that depending on what practice you work at, there's a new scheme of buying a subscription to get access to flea, worm consults
Yeah.
or discounts. And so, one thing that I've spoken about before on my socials is that people are renting access to a system they used to buy access to. So you have a subscription model to you know do Netflix or to go to the dentist. Now that's a very big thing in veterinary medicine as well, right? And so it's a part of our world. And a lot of people get confused that when they are buying that service, getting free vaccines, getting free flea and worm treatment, getting two free consults a year, whatever it is, that they think they're getting insurance. However,
Mm,
there's a little imbalance because essentially what they're getting is a cheaper pay plan that if they use it correctly, it'll be cheaper for them. But a lot of people don't, and so they
mhm.
kind of confuse that subscription as insurance. But I'd say insurance is also extremely expensive, or if it's not
Yeah.
expensive, it's usually way below what you'd want for a complicated intervention, given the fact that things are getting more expensive.
Yeah, no, I hear you on that. And how do you feel? I mean, you're a good person. I wouldn't be friends with you if you weren't a good person.
Yeah.
So I know that you'll feel a certain way, and it would be interesting if you have conversations with your colleagues about this situation where if someone says to you, I can't afford to do that, I can't, or yeah, I'm not going to pay for that surgery or whatever. And I know that it's probably not a one size fits all because it's probably sometimes they have the money and they just don't want to part with it, and sometimes this person really can't afford it. How do you feel when people say to you, yeah, I'm not going to pay for that, I'm not prepared to pay for that, or I can't pay for that?
Well, it's difficult. It's difficult. And the reason why it's difficult is because, like you said, sometimes you get a sense that it's, they don't want to pay for it, not because they don't have access to it, but they don't see the value in that money. And sometimes it's because they see the value in it, they just don't have it. And so that kind
Mm-hmm.
of, my approach of it changes. The difficulty is that whatever people's decisions are, it's very important that I try my best to not judge them, which is also a very difficult thing to do, because
Mm-hmm.
it's not my job to work out why people's motivations are what they are. But how I feel about it is frustration, and on a regular basis, where I'm having to give people several different options and try and weigh things up. And one of the most labor intensive parts of my job, and I feel that I make an extra effort to do as an individual, is lay things out so clearly so people know what they're buying and also know why they're doing it. And the nurses that work at my practices often are saying, "Can you hurry up? Can you speed up?" And sometimes it's just because I'm having that difficult conversation. Let's say, for example, I don't know, dog has a really bad ear infection, and we want to, I don't know, get a sample, see what bacteria it is, right? Depending on the intervention, we can spend a lot of your money very quickly. So if I send
Mm-hmm.
it off to the lab, find out what bacteria it is, it's going to be more expensive than if I have a look under a slide in practice. Or if I say, here's some steroids, here's an ear cleaner, use it twice a day and come back in 10 days and see how we get on. But so much of my job now is trying to get people to say, here is the benefits, here are my
Mm-hmm.
thoughts about it, and how can I tell you that the outcomes, like if I just give you an ear cleaner and a steroid, you've probably got a 60% chance of a positive outcome. But if we find out what bacteria it is, I am going to say 95%, or if not more, once we find out what it is, I'm able to treat it appropriately. And if we do a
Mm-hmm.
cytology in between, I can tell you with, I don't know, 80% accuracy that I'm going to be able to get on top of it. I don't know what bacteria it is, but I know there's bacteria, they look like this, and there's also fungus, so I'm going to give you this process, whatever, whatever, whatever. So it's so much of my job, or I feel my job is speaking to people and getting them to have a better understanding, having clarity, because so much of this job is about people not willing to part with money they don't see value in, like I said earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're able to represent the value, whether or not they're able to afford it, what I want is better outcomes for the dogs, the cats, the lizards, the whatever, the birds that come through the door. And to be able to do that, I need to be able to navigate the financial side to improve the outcomes of their pets and their loved ones. And that's such a big part of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're having to be a salesman, but not for yourself. You're selling the welfare of the animal, right? You're selling the outcome for that animal. And I don't know if you're on Facebook, I can't remember, but
Yeah.
quite often these things will come up on my feed and it'll be, oh, the vet gave me this and it didn't work. So I went back and then they gave me this and it didn't work. And now I've gone back and now they want 10K to put my dog under an MRI. And I'm thinking, they probably offered you the MRI in the first place.
Mm.
And, it's not obviously not, like you say, not for me to judge, but I think what I'm learning is the more you do early on, the better chance you have of getting a clearer understanding than if you try I guess you go cheap, you get cheap, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I thought, yeah, to a certain extent. I mean, it's a difficult one because there's another side to this story that, with experience, you're able to. They call it the art of medicine, and you kind of get this vibe about certain animals as you hear things. So you're able to kind of draw yourself towards certain outcomes and certain more likely outcomes because you're used to it. You've got a flavor
Yeah.
for it basically. And but I think what is important is that we as vets just need to be better at communicating. I'm going to be really up and down and really straightforward. We just need to communicate better. And how we do that is by taking the time to get people to understand. And the difficulty is when they go on Facebook is that they'll say, like exactly like you said, I had this issue, this didn't work, and now they're saying I need to spend £600 for sedation and X-ray and whatever. But if you explain appropriately what the directions may be, and I'm not saying we spend every single consult writing an estimate, but we get one of our colleagues to do that at a later point. But if you do that, then it minimizes the chance of that confusion and almost suggestion that we're in it just because we, are fobbing you off. And, you're not going to get everyone, but, you can improve outcomes. And I think also vets we have this kind of superiority complex sometimes that because we're the vet, we know best. On average, we're going to have a better idea, but just because we know better outcomes doesn't mean we should cut corners on our ways of communicating, because whether or not we learn all this information from our clients, they give us an insight that we don't have, and we've only seen your animal for 10-15 minutes. We need you to give us that wider context, and you also need to trust us to share. That relationship is sometimes more important than the route that we take, because that particular pet, that particular companion needs to have a better outcome. And to do that, we need to be able to communicate appropriately and have trust in that, because the dogs aren't speaking to us, the cats aren't speaking to us.
Yeah. And listening to you, I think it brings home that point to me about, and working with the vets that I work with, you have to have an unlimited social battery, don't you? Like the energy to be able to give people these explanations on repeat is something that I think a lot of people who like work at in an office job and maybe have time to themselves, they don't think about how much it takes out of you to continually put all of this energy into other people. And I think it is important for people to understand the burnout that vets experience, putting all that energy in and then however many times not getting it back, or not getting the result that you want, or finding out that the animal's really poorly or something like that. People are generally really shocked when I sort of stick up for vets and say to them, you no, like, as in like, they'll, someone will complain about a vet or a groomer or something like that, and I'll be like, just, they're just doing their job. And when I then explain the burnout that comes with that job, people are really shocked. And they've not really considered, they think, oh, you just get to play with animals all day. And actually, you're working so intensely with so much brain power for every single one of those patients.
Yeah, I think it's you're absolutely right. When you work with animals, people only get the one side view because they are going to the vet and they are in there for 15 minutes. And just as you very eloquently have said, like, there are elements outside of that where I could have just rung someone to inform them of a lump that I've removed, and the results may not be so favourable. I may have had 3 emergency cases, and then I'm doing your puppy's vaccine straight after just coming out of that. I may have had, my own life also exists within this space. Do you know what I mean? Like,
No, it doesn't. Yes.
I am also a human that has bad days. Maybe I didn't get my morning matcha from wherever. Do you know what I mean? Like, these are important things.
That would be a travesty. Yeah.
Points were made. Do you know what I mean? So I think it's the wider context of being human and also trying to commit to this higher level and be held to a really high standard, because these are people's family members. It's an important part of of who we are. But the pressures to get it right all the time are super high, and that takes a toll.
Yeah, 100%. So this was my kind of section about giving vets a break. That was the goal of part 1, and now part 2 is going to be how we can actually make life better for our animals in terms of how we communicate with our vets. So my next question was going to be, what are some things that you see on a regular basis, or you hear about, or you see on social media, that people think are really normal and probably wouldn't go to a vet, or would maybe just ask their next door neighbour or give them a paracetamol or something, that you think, no, seriously, come and see your vet? Or not even come and see your vet, but that animal is really suffering. And I have some in mind, but we'll see what you say.
I think my top 2 are they're eating and drinking.
Okay.
I find that no matter what happens to somebody's family member, that if they're eating and drinking, it's somehow this litmus test for them being okay. I've seen cases where their whole, a dog's mouth is covered in plaque, all the teeth are rotting, dogs, got lumps and bumps around the mouth, just a horrible situation inside its mouth, and they're barely eating soft food. But it's like, well, he is eating and he is drinking, and I'm thinking to myself, please, no, just let's all
Yeah.
just hold hands. We're in this
Yeah.
15 minutes. Let's hold hands. Let's take a deep breath.
Let's really use our brains.
Let's use
Yeah.
our brains. Let's work together, guys. You know what I mean? Let's,
Yeah.
we'll get the gel pens out, the smelly gel pens out, and we'll have a conversation
Make a
together.
mind map. That, this is exactly how I
Literally.
talk to my students. You should be a teacher. Yeah.
I'm just thinking to myself, what else other option do they have? You want them to, until they're starving, they're fine. Is that the
Yeah.
balance? Because they're in so much, or for example, the dog that, they're not in pain. They come in with this idea and they will tell me their dog is not in pain, and I really find just the idea that animals, for some strange reason, just exist in this space of not being in pain because I've decided they're not in pain.
Hmm.
And it's and I know it's even more difficult for animals that really hide their signs of pain. So in rabbits, it's a real issue. In reptiles, oh my word, just I don't think they're in pain. I've some of the grisly things. I could tell you some stories. The grisly things I found, and is off the back of a tortoise not being in pain. And I'm thinking,
Mm.
with all due respect, this tortoise is 50 years old. Have you ever decided what the tortoise would have to be doing to be in pain? It's like you have an idea of what pain would be, but you don't know what pain would look like, and so you've decided there is no pain. So
Mm.
I've said pain a lot of times in the last two sentences,
No, no,
but
no. Like it's such an important conversation, and we'll bang
yeah.
about it until the cows come home as behaviorists. And like, it's so nice that you're so like pain and behavior minded as well.
Mm,
We know, like, I'm sure people who follow me on socials and stuff will be sick to death of the signs of pain in dogs and cats and that sort of thing. And that information is pretty accessible. But if we're talking
mm,
something like a rabbit or a reptile,
yeah.
what could we look for that would maybe indicate that there's pain that isn't, a tilted head or limping or all the really obvious stuff? What are the less obvious things that people could look for?
So what you can do is look at their wider general behavior. So if you have an animal that's healthy, they tend to do certain normal things. So they move well, they eat and poop well, they drink well, and they will do things which they're designed to do naturally, right? In small mammals, rabbits, guinea pigs, rats, rodents, so on and so forth, they tend to kind of squint. If you're really in pain, you've got a really
Yes.
bad tummy, they kind of squint, and they tend to grimace, so they pull the corner of their mouths back. And there's a quite good body of research from the University of Newcastle for this. It's just this kind of like wincing, and you'll see that. And you know what? You can, and when I say it to people, they go, "Oh, okay," because they get that. Wincing is this kind of universal language that
Yeah.
lots of mammals do when they're in profound levels of pain. Now, but another thing that rabbits will do is they'll stop eating, they'll stop pooping,
Hmm.
and they'll stop moving. And sometimes they have varying different forms of hunching their back, a bit like dogs would if they were in kind of like abdominal pain. Or sometimes they'll spread themselves out, their breathing rate goes up. These kind of general, almost odd behaviors. And I think what also is a bit of a pet peeve as well, no pun intended, is that so many people take the normal for granted as a reference point. They kind of go, well, eating, drinking, fine. But what other normal behaviors exist with your family member? If you have a brother or a mom or whatever, and they do certain routines every single day, and on the fifth day, after 4 days of being fine, the fifth day, all those routines change, and they stay in their room and they're quiet, and they haven't come down for lunch or whatever, and they haven't drunk anything that you're aware of. You go, oh, what's going on? Like, apply the same
Yeah.
rules to animals. They also follow the same rules. So for reptiles, yes, it's even more difficult because they don't really show any signs at all in the same way.
And birds
But
as well, right?
yeah, but so birds are this. I would say this kind of in between. So birds, they will kind of do the same thing. So first they start off at reptiles. So reptiles just slow down. They just don't move as much, and they're more quiet. They tend to hide a little bit more. Sometimes if they have the ability to change their color, it's like bearded dragons, for example. They have a bit more darker color on their beard. They're more subdued, generally speaking, and they're just not as thrifty. They don't want to eat as much. They don't seem to be
Hmm.
respond so well. And birds kind of have this similar way until they get really bad, and then they almost go to the mammal side. So they'll wince as well. They'll get fluffed up, and they'll kind of hunch over, and they'll do this kind of. And usually at that point, that's when the client comes and says, "Oh, he's a bit." And at that point, I'm also thinking, let's put the brakes on this.
Yeah.
There's something quite painful going on, or we've been ill for an extended period of time.
Yeah.
So, but reptiles won't often do that. They just kind of go within themselves, and but even then, you can know what normal is. Like, apply that forward, and it also says to me that a lot of clients, especially with reptiles, fish, birds, just kind of don't really pay attention to them until they want to have a direct relation with them that's comfortable for them. Do you know what I mean? In between that, they're not paying as much attention.
Yeah. So I guess an example in the dog world would be the common thing that we hear is they're not in pain because he still chases the ball. And, for me, who works on scientific academic papers, I'm like, well, I have evidence in front of me that dogs will still chase a ball, if they're in pain. But getting other people to understand that, and you can totally see the logic, right? We probably wouldn't do it because we can't tolerate any sort of pain as humans. But animals obviously have this massive higher tolerance and will stomach a lot before they suddenly go, yeah, I can't do this anymore. And then they start to notice there's a problem when suddenly the dog doesn't want to cuddle anymore and that sort of thing. And then that's, like you say, when it becomes, right, well, something's really a problem because I want to be able to cuddle Fluffy and suddenly Fluffy doesn't want to cuddle me anymore. Whereas, if we looked really hard and we had a physio look at Fluffy 18 months ago, we might have been able to get a head start.
Yeah, and and one more thing. I had a case recently with this, not to get too technical, with acute pancreatitis. Now, for people who don't know, the pancreas or acute pancreatitis is one of the most painful things a dog can go through, especially acute. And I had a case recently of a dog that looked like on death's door the other day, right? Not to get too morbid, looked like death's door. And we did the test, we found out it was acute pancreatitis. And I could tell you for free that when I told the clients, they were just like, "Oh, so can we take him home and maybe come back tomorrow and give him a pain relief injection?" And it was just this kind of, "Oh no, I need to really tell you that your dog is in so much pain, they've gone into shock, basically." Like, that's pale gums, everything, the whole shebang, because he was in so much pain. And I think it's very easy for me as a vet to kind of maybe not villainize, but be frustrated with clients because you think, how could you see this? And I think that's where the education and communication element can be improved. But at the same time, it's like, if you're going to be a caregiver for another living human being, it's absolutely your duty to, as far as I'm concerned, to make sure that you're checking in to establish whether or not your animal, your being, your family friend, your furry friend is thriving and having the opportunity to thrive. And that is the heartbreaking thing that is so difficult to do on such a regular basis. I'm sure you have the same thing.
Yeah, and I think this is not aimed at anyone I work with. You're all lovely, love you to bits. But there are people out there, I think ego gets in the way as well. They'll say, I've had dogs all my life, and I would know if my dog was poorly and I would know this and I got it from a great breeder and I did all of this. And you're trying to say, I say to them, I'm not a vet, I'm not diagnosing anything. I'm just saying he probably shouldn't sit like that.
Yeah.
But they, some people just won't hear it. And I think I agree with you that if you take on the responsibility as you would with a child, if there's any semblance of the idea that they are unwell or in pain or discomfort or whatever, you do have a responsibility to investigate that, even if it comes up with nothing.
Absolutely. And I think the word is should, because maybe another conversation for another time. Sometimes I feel like we do this kind of like, like you said, if it was a child, but sometimes people bring their children in and I think maybe your child should be on this table, not Chippy the dog, to be honest with you. That cough sounds a little bit too heavy set, to be honest with you. So it is a difficult conversation.
There's a lot of research about like parenting styles that crosses over, so maybe that's a whole other episode. So I have a slightly kind of icky question. It can be icky in some conversations, in the sense, and this is not vet bashing whatsoever. I work with lots of wonderful vets who are not a problem whatsoever. And then there are some that really, really struggle with the idea that an animal is in pain if they are not falling to pieces on the examination table.
Mm.
And I had a vet recently who straight up just told me, I'm not going to look at this, I'm not going to look at this, I'm not going to do this, the dog's being dominant. And I was like, obviously I'm there thinking, well, I'm not a vet, so I can't say to you, no, it's definitely this. All I can say is, please, I'm begging you, please look at this, please do the test. Why do you think some vets are amazing and go the extra mile and really investigate and totally get it like you do, and some vets just think this is some like hippy dippy nonsense and this dog's fine or this rabbit's fine or whatever?
I think it comes back to a field of thought of making sure an animal is looked after and cared for outside of it being this almost like a project where you see them in a kind of reductionist project. You see them in like almost Lego blocks. And what I mean by that is a very abstract idea, but the idea at least is that there are certain people who understand that if you have a foreign body in an intestine, you have to remove it, right? You have an ear infection, you have to treat the bacteria if there is one, right? But what people don't often do a very good job of is empathetically extending themselves to the experience of another being. Some people struggle to do it with humans, to be honest with you. That's
Yeah.
a whole nother big ass conversation, right? Well, we
Yeah.
know that. But if that's difficult, in many cases, what you find is the exact same type of thought process. And this is why the idea of like animals being one thing and humans being another is such a mistake. It's a whole grey scale of how people
Mm-hmm.
prioritize human experience and animal experience. And ultimately, we're all animals, and as hippy dippy as that sounds, but it is true. And so I think what people really struggle to do is externally exteriorize their own feelings. And also, we have to remember that certain people also don't give themselves the space to feel pain. You know, at my old practice, there was one nurse who was just very stiff upper lip, very, just get on with it. And she
Yeah.
wasn't the biggest advocate for managing pain in dogs and cats, despite my frustrations. But when she broke her toe once, she still came to work, and we only found out that she had a broken toe because her foot had swollen 3 times the size, and she was still hobbling around the practice, thinking that if she has 2 paracetamol, she'll be fine, despite the fact she clearly was in pain. And so when you have this kind of like, you live by the sword, die by the sword behavior, or animals are this binary blocks. We have to look at their heart, and they have this issue. They have this skin issue. We'll treat this. You're not actually holistically looking at an animal as an entire being that's having lived experience. And I think a lot of people don't give animals that space to be living, sentient beings that have their own desires and having agency. They see them as beings that kind of serve a purpose, and they go from A to B, and they have a bit of a wag of tail, they eat some food, and that's about it really. And I think that's sad, but it's a truth that I've seen many times before.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you think about, do you still encounter vets who kind of give this sort of bad, you have to be the alpha, you have to be the boss, dominance mentality to clients, and do you approach that topic with them, or is that not
I've
your,
seen it.
potentially not your job to address that with them, I guess?
I've seen it, and I would say that it's usually older men. To be honest with you, I would say millennial men upwards tend to be. I mean, just for everyone who's listening, the veterinary profession in the UK is of new graduates. The latest census suggested that there was 88% of new graduates were women, and so we know that women on average have a better understanding and access to empathy, and it's also why women tend to be in these roles where empathy is required at a greater level than other fields, for example. And so it's no
Mm-hmm.
surprise that you have so many women who become fantastic great vets, because there's a level of empathy and compassion that's needed without the financial return that people would always want, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there is this understanding that, generally speaking, you get that. But a lot of typically older men have a kind of rough and tumble approach when it comes to managing, especially dogs from my experience, because
Hmm.
there is just this misconception that dogs are a little bit more rough and just a bit more rough. You can handle them, so especially they're bigger dogs. How I approach it is essentially it's difficult because whilst we're also dealing with the situation where a man typically, not always, typically will handle a dog maybe on average a little bit more rough than your counterparts who are women. You also have to come up against the resistance of what it is to be a man speaking to another man about how they handle and do their job. So there's a huge amount of bravado that comes with it as well.
Or
And so
a
my
5'3" woman trying to talk to a 50-something-year-old man about their experiences. Yeah.
perfect example, and there's so many different layers to it, and we could talk about patriarchy and misogyny all day long. I'm sure there's, again, another
There's plenty of
podcast.
podcasts doing that, I think. I don't think I need to carry that torch.
So, but what I'm trying to say at least is that the way I approach that is typically to try and, if someone has had a bad experience with one of my colleagues or a different vet in another practice for various different reasons, it essentially is build trust and show that there are alternate methods to having a positive outcome which aren't built on the ideas of something that's outdated, archaic, and has never made any sense. And
Hmm.
the beauty of that, I see it a lot. I see this a lot, and I find it's very frustrating. People say, "Oh, my dog doesn't like men." And I understand that, but I don't think dogs come in and go, "Oh, look at that man over there. I can identify his gender based on, what I find." Do you know what I mean? What I find is
Yeah.
that men on average tend to be a little bit more bolshy. They tend to have a larger stature and they tend to be a little bit more haphazard in the way that they handle animals. And as a
And they're
result,
louder.
and they're louder, and so what my job is to do is identify is what is the man that we're dealing with and that your dog is uncomfortable with, and how can I dispel and remove as many of those factors as possible. Well, I'm going to sit on the floor. I'm not going to face them head on. I'm going to allow them the dog to come into my space as opposed to forcing myself into their space. Do they have a anxiety issue? Okay, so let's talk about certain drugs we can do next time you come back in. And it's funny because you also get the anxiety of the person who is the caregiver as well. So I see, honestly, at all the practices, if there's a aggressive dog that comes in, usually Rotties, Dobermans, Cane Corsas, all of these huge dogs, a lot of the clients want to see me. And part of that is because I'm a man, I know that. But part of it is because, ironically, there is this fear around these big dogs that are often owned by men who often have this kind of, oh, you've got to be rough with them, you've got to do all these things. And so then you have a whole platform for a really uncomfortable, potentially dangerous interaction between a vet who is uncomfortable, who's having to deal with the pressures of being stared at by a 60-kilogram Rottie with their 45-year-old caregiver saying, the last vet I saw, she didn't really know what she was doing. Like, all of these things come into it. So they see me, a man, 6'4", pretty large stature, and then I'm sitting on the floor, talking in a high,
And they're like, what
frilly
is going on?
voice.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Drinking a matcha. Yeah.
Exactly. And but still getting the outcomes that are needed and not being afraid. I grew up with Rotties, and they are some of the biggest wusses that you come into contact with. It's really about your approach and disarming the client as much as disarming the dog, the cat, or whatever you're seeing, and that's where the real work comes into it. And the beauty of vet practices is that you do play on certain traditional roles to get the outcome you want, because whether or not we like it, those things matter to a lot of our clients.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love everything you just said. So I don't have too many more questions, and we could go on about these things for hours, but just little snippets.
Sure.
Speaking solely about companion animals, but we can include exotics.
Sure.
What do you think are the biggest, potentially most overlooked welfare issues facing companion animals from your side of things, how you see things?
The power of obesity, the power of weight
Hmm.
is a big one. people don't understand. I'm also a stickler for it as well, to be honest with you. People don't understand how their particular desire to feed, in many cases overfeed their pets and their loved ones, can have such a marked effect on the quality of their life, the duration of their life, and so many other diseases. And also that age is not a disease. I find that really frustrating because from a physiological, from a veterinary point of view, just because a dog is old, or just because a hamster is old, or just because of whatever, and you spent this much, and you don't have insurance, and you don't want to spend this money because they might only have a year or two left, is not a reason to forego healthcare.
Yeah.
And that conversation, and you know what, it happens a lot of my, what in the wider veterinary world, the conversations around and fear around age also come up, and a lot of vets and veterinary professionals are worried about older animals because of the supposed increased probability of other issues. And I guess that's somewhat true. But if you do all the checks and you do the blood tests and you do all the further workup and you find that that dog is essentially healthy, it's healthy.
Yeah.
And so the context is key and experience is key. But Jackson, he had a dental and he was 15 and a half, so a few months ago now. And he came through it absolutely fine. And yeah, I will get regularly clients that come in and say, "Oh, my Staffy is 11 years old. I think he's too old for a dental." Or my hamster is 2 years old and I only got him for £15 and he's a little bit old, so I don't think we should do this. And I'm like, your hamster's got a broken leg. I'm not sure what. I'm not
Yeah.
sure
What do you want me to
what.
do?
What's the middle ground here? Do you know what I mean? Like, what
Yeah.
what are we really
Wheels?
discussing?
I don't-
Exactly. So yeah, I think, but weight is a big one. Weight is a big one. Age is not disease, and also the importance of dental care. I'm really getting into my teeth recently. Obviously, I'll be harping on about it, but
I'm
you know,
gonna try to get Bolly on to talk teeth because he
please.
was he was talking teeth last time I saw him. He seems to be the teeth guy. So
He loves it. That's his bag. He's his bag. He's the dentist, the proverbial dentist. And I think teeth is such a underrepresented thing that even we as vets sometimes underdiagnose, and how painful that can be, especially in cats. So those
oh
three
gosh,
areas
yeah.
are really important to me.
Why is it such a problem in cats?
Genetics, it's just one of those things. I think I saw some research that 22% of cats, all ages, have some form of dental disease, and that's why I'm so anal about it. I'm always checking cats' teeth, and the amount of times. The other day I had a cat that was maybe a year and a half, four or five teeth had these almost like ulcerations where the tooth was essentially
Oh
melting
gosh.
away, and essentially I'm telling you a year and a half that your cat needs to remove 5 or 6 teeth because there's no coming back from that. So imagine having toothache in 5 or 6 of your teeth and your 18 months old cat. Like that is a real reality for cats on a regular basis. And so, you know, it's my job to make sure that cat doesn't have to live with that existence for an extended period of time. But it's very easy for me as a vet to be like, oh, it's 18 months. It's really, really important. And I'm taking it more seriously because, not because I love teeth necessarily, but because I know how many cats and dogs and other animals slip through the gaps because of poor teeth. And
Yeah.
that's where my focus goes as a result.
And a lot of them who are food motivated, they just will keep eating, won't they? And it's so normalized that they'll be like, oh yeah, he's got really bad breath, like he stinks, blah blah blah. And you like, he's not supposed to. So we probably should have a think about. I mean, my dog the other day, just like one day, had his breath smelt a bit differently, and I was like, right, immediately, getting out the plaque remover, doubling down because, I mean, if nothing else, like that, it's expensive, right? Dental care. Like if you do the preventative stuff now, you'll thank yourself for it later. Just
Absolutely.
quickly, do you think that the cat thing has anything to do with diet? Because obviously a lot of them are on this quite sugary, wet food, aren't they? And they don't chew on things like dogs do. Or am I just pulling stuff out of my ass that there's no evidence for?
From what I know, it's not a good crossover. I'm sure Bolo would give you the full breakdown on that research wise, but from my understanding, there's not much of a crossover. what is important is that the main ways to look after your teeth aren't very different from humans. So no one's expecting you to go and brush your cat's teeth. But if you can, being the operative word, which is very rare, fantastic. But there are places to buy lots of different products, your enzymatic cleaners and things you put in water, things you put on food, certain treats, certain feeds, which are more specifically tailored to managing and maintaining a cat's teeth. But sometimes it's just luck. And think this way, 22% of cats is a very high number for it to be reduced down to the idea of poor quality food. It just leans and suggests that it is just one of those things, from my understanding at least. But I think whether or not it's related or not, I'm printing out it's the VOHC. It's called Veterinary Oral Health Care Council or whatever. And on their website, they have resources for dogs and cats specifically about listed treats and products that you can use for plaque and tartar. And I'm printing them off constantly. And if I see a dog that's got relatively good teeth, doesn't need a dental, but I can see the beginnings of tartar buildup, I'm like, here you go, take this. Here's a place you can have stuff to maintain your dog's teeth or slightly improve it. Take that. So, if that's a really good resource, and people appreciate that because it helps them, it gives them the power to maintain and avoid things in future.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we are gonna start to wrap up. This has been amazing. It's been super insightful, even just for me. So hopefully other people listening will find it interesting. What is one myth about vets or the veterinary profession that you wish that we could just put in the bin?
That we are in this profession for money.
Yeah. Because you're bitch, I'm broke.
Listen. With all due respect, I'm an extremely frugal person and I like expensive things. I will put my hands up. But the way that I have access to nice things is by making every other part of my life exceptionally frugal. I keep things to an absolute minimum all the time because the things that I want in life are very specific. And for the work that I put in and for the years that I have trained, and for all the times I've done free things, I've given free information, I've stayed behind, for all the things that I put into this career, if we looked at the return, especially on the value or the return of investment, shall we say, let's get all financial with it. Return on investment for what I put in to get this degree is bad. It's really bad. It's really
bad. Yeah, I don't want to talk about student debt.
No, so it's bad, but that's all we need to know. It is bad. So the idea that I would beat myself up and stay in this particular world because it is some kind of cash cow is a big fat juicy lie. And the ceiling for veterinary salaries is super quick. So someone who's 6 years in, 7 years in, is likely to be on the exact same if you're 25 years in. The exact same.
Christ, yeah.
So, and you know what? We could talk about whether that's fair or not, but the idea that we're somehow in it for the money is just a big fat lie. And you know what? The worst thing is that we do all these things because we're passionate. We got into it because we're passionate, the large majority of us. And we will still go out of our ways to try and facilitate cheaper care because it's ultimately the large majority of us really want you guys as clients, as paying members of society, as peers, as people that we have regular conversations with on a regular basis. We want you to have a better outcome. And we don't want to see your animals ill, sick, tired, old, and we don't want to see that. What we want them to be is healthy, happy, and enjoying life in whatever remit that looks like. And to do that and then be reminded that we are, essentially money grabbers and we're sponsored by Big Pharma or Big Veterinary, whatever that is. Listen, if there's a Big Veterinary, can I have the memo? Can you chauffeur
can
me?
I have his number?
Can I have his number? I'm ready. Please take the wheel. Drive me there. I'll Uber myself there. If there is this Big Veterinary building, I'm ready to go. Please. But it's that. I find it really frustrating. But at the same time, I don't want to blame people too much for this idea of perception because we as a veterinary community have done a very bad in communicating why things look the way they do. And we as vets will often also engage with these weird terms like, if you can't afford, don't get a dog. And I think the so binary way of doing it, considering so many of us are perpetually poorer by the year anyway, and also that some of the best clients and caregivers I've ever met are some of the people who are in the most disenfranchised, lower earning, pay thresholds ever, and they will
Yeah.
literally go without food to facilitate care for animals. So, the idea that I'm in it for money, big fat joke. No thanks.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really important message. And so finally, if you could leave the listeners with one thing to remember next time they visit their vet, or do differently, or anything like that, what would it be?
It's a big question.
Or you can have like two or three. I'm not gonna not gonna hold you prisoner to one.
I think the one. No, let's up the ante.
Let's challenge ourselves.
Let's challenge ourselves. I think the one thing that I would want clients to leave or come with when it comes to the vets is just an open mind about our intention. Assume the best. You're
Yeah,
not
see the
always
good.
see the good, assume the best. Assume the best, because when you assume the best, you leave the door open for the possibility of outcomes you never anticipated. And that is such a powerful tool in medicine. It's such a
Yeah.
powerful tool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we all have to put ego aside and just accept that there's so much that we don't know. So we just have to have belief and have faith, and obviously that's how we can do right by our animals. Well, thank you so much for your time. Is there anything that you would like to plug while you are here?
No, I think this was a great podcast. You should make lots more, and I should come back on. That's what I'm
Lovely.
plugging.
Amazing. Okay, amazing. Well, we can do this. We can do this again. Amazing. Fabian's in my book, Emotional Wellbeing in the Domestic Dog. Wrote me a little I don't know what you call it, memoir. A
Memoir, dear diary.
Yeah, and
Excerpt,
I think hey,
excerpt, maybe that's the right
excerpt.
terminology.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. And I'll put all your Insta links in the text and all of that. So go give him a follow. That was the wonderful Fabian Rivers. Fabian, thank you so much for joining me for episode 1 of Talking Sit. If you like the podcast, please do subscribe, leave a comment, leave a review if you can. I will be uploading every Wednesday with a different professional from this field. So do join me next week, Wednesday, for episode 2 of Talking Sit.